Good evening. Thank you for joining us. It's Friday, which means that you can kick up your feet and get ready for the weekend. But we have a lot of interesting things going on this weekend. First of all, starting tomorrow morning, India is going to kick off the world's largest inoculation vaccination drive with the COVID vaccines all across the country. There are teams ready to roll it out. We understand from the health minister that the government has an online platform. Now, it could be a website, it could be an app. There's no real clarity right now. It's called CoWIN with a W. C-O-W-I-N. CoWIN. You have to spell it correctly, or otherwise it looks like cow in. So put the hyphen in the right place. CoWIN is the platform. And apparently anyone who wants the vaccine has to register on that platform. And they will be given a scannable, barcoded, scannable certificate that they have been vaccinated. This basically means, and of course, we know the Prime Minister is going to have an event tomorrow kicking off the vaccination drive. And there are centers now all over the country ready to hand out vaccinations to the first batch. Remember, the first batch of people are 3 crore healthcare workers. In other news this morning, the New Indian Express and the Free Press Journal carried stories of healthcare workers who want to be able to either opt out or delay their vaccination because they're not comfortable with the kind of data that's come out on vaccines. And you can refer to our YouTube channel where we've had conversations about the data specifically. There are also other, healthcare workers who want the option of one or the other vaccine, which the government has said very clearly is not something people are getting. Now, after these 3 crore people, the second batch that will get the vaccine are people above the age of 50. First, people above the age of 60, then people above the age of 50 up to the age of 60, and then those below the age of 50 who have comorbidity. Now, how is the government hoping to do this? In a story that's also now been written in the newspapers with the data of the Election Commission. Now, this is what we're being told. The Election Commission has extended full assistance. We don't know what full assistance means to the government of India to identify targeted beneficiaries at the poll station level, so booth level, for the COVID-19 vaccination drive. But it wants health authorities to delete the data once the vaccination exercise is over. One would assume this vaccination exercise, which is starting with 3 crore people now, will take about a year or two to complete. Now, December 31st last year, the Home Secretary, which is the Secretary, the highest officer in the Home Ministry, Ajay Balla, wrote to the Chief Election Commissioner, Sunil Arora, asked him for the Commission's help to identify people above the age of 50 at the polling booth level. And now we understand the EC has agreed. It has written back on the 4th of January. On the issue of data security, the Home Secretary wrote that the government is complying with the current best practices of ensuring cybersecurity. He has assured the poll panel that the data will be used only for the purpose of the vaccination. Now, we understand there are 12 documents: voter ID, Aadhaar, driver's license, passport, pension document, which could be required for beneficiary identification. I took a look at the guidelines. Now, the Election Commission has guidelines that were released a few years ago that were updated recently. They basically say that the Election Commission can share electoral rolls freely with other government departments, referring mostly to investigative departments. But they've also said that the database in its entirety, including the photographs of voters, cannot be provided. If any department asks for information, they should supply particulars of the person whose electoral database they need. So this is what the guidelines say right now, that basically that investigating agencies can ask for specific information about an individual by saying, okay, these are the 3 people, we want their information. But the whole database, lock, stock and barrel, being handed over is not something that's allowed in the guidelines. So questions that we're asking right now. Is the Election Commission breaking its rules or bending its rules in some way to do this? 2, given the situation that we are in right now, given the fact that people have died, that we aren't able to go to work, that economy is not fully functioning, is this a valid reason to do so? And even if all of that is yes, what sort of cybersecurity threats could we possibly face as a country, and why should that be worrying? Joining me right now to help me answer those questions Mr. Sanjay Hegde, senior advocate with the Supreme Court, Mr. Shailesh Gandhi, a very senior RTI activist, and one of my favorite voices to have a conversation with, Mr. Pawan Duggal, who's an advocate who specializes in cyber law, who's going to talk to us about the sensitivity of this data. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for giving us time. Mr. Hegde, first straight up to you about the rules and whether or not the Election Commission is even allowed to make this decision, saying, yes, we will share the database with you so you can identify people at the poll level.
The Election Commission is a constitutional entity. There are provisions in the Constitution for the Election Commission, 323, if I remember rightly. And then they act under the Representation of People's Act. Nevertheless, data they have in the form of voters' lists. They have made their own guidelines so far with regard to the when they will share details about a voter. But this is an unprecedented situation. Have they actually modified their guidelines? Or the government may have to make a suitable amendment in the Representation of People's Act to allow them to share their data with health authorities for the sake of the pandemic. Again, if this is the legal way of going about it, but very often our government's response is to make things up as they go along. So we've been going along, and so the Election Commission has told the health authorities and the Home Ministry specifically that, look, we will provide it, but please delete it thereafter. If they don't delete it, if they make copies of it, if they share it with somebody else, who is to care? We really don't know. And ultimately, what will go along? We know that on the political side, there's a whole system of pana pramukhs to get the voter out. So essentially, there can be a resort to the pana pramukhs to see to it that 50 plus people are escorted instead of to a voting booth to the health center.
Mr. Hegde, I have like 6 or 7 problems with the things you just said. First of all, escorted by the para pramukhs. Are you telling me that the 50 plus people will not be given a choice? Which is how it's happening everywhere else in the world. You want the vaccine, it's available in this hospital, bring your ID, come here, show it to us, get the vaccine, go home. What's wrong with that system? Why are we escorting people? Or why does it sound like we're going to escort people?
Well, I was only telling you the way that this government seems to think. Yes, we should make it voluntary. And I am 50 plus. So I hope that this doesn't come through, but it would not surprise me if something like this happens. And particularly when, you can always justify it and lend some PM care funds also to this exercise. By saying that we have to cover everybody who's 50 plus, and it's only when they are vaccinated that everybody else is safe. Sooner or later, the question of legality or of what kind of legal force can you bear upon people to see to it that they turn up for vaccination is going to come about. You might see an ordinance. That is the way this country has been governed in recent times.
But okay, so the couple of other things that you did say, and the language that is being used, where the Election Commission has apparently asked that, yes, I'll give it to you, but just make sure you delete it, when you're done with it. It almost sounds like you're sharing recipes over WhatsApp, this is my secret family recipe for my secret family, like butter chicken. Please use it, but don't give it to anybody else. This is hardly the official. It doesn't reflect the seriousness with which the Election Commission is dealing with this goldmine of a database, does it? And legally, does that hold muster?
Legally, I don't think it holds muster, not without a specific amendment to the Representation of People's Act. The Election Commission was envisioned only as a mechanism for conducting free and fair elections. That the fact that the data has got more valuable is a function of our technology. The law has not kept up with technology. Though people on the ground level have kept up, there are soft copies of these each electoral roll which are available, and searchable soft copies. So what is available privately is now being made available publicly.
Okay, so and I have, like I said, I have 6 questions, but I have to bring in the rest of the panel as well. Let me bring in Mr. Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi, good evening. Such a pleasure to always talk to you. Also, although you don't look it as someone who's above 50, does it make you uncomfortable that the government is accessing this database in order to make sure that everybody gets that vaccination? Would you prefer that this be a voluntary exercise?
No, I mean, it should be a voluntary exercise. That's a separate question. Question is, should the information be taken from the electoral rolls? I believe yes. In fact, it's already available everywhere, as Mr. Hegde also pointed out. Reams of paper are printed. This is available in soft copy as well. And if I mistake not, the Election Commission publishes the rolls on the internet itself. We have a great thing happening in India today. 2 things which I find a little worrisome. Yes, incidentally, I am over 70, clearly over 70. But 2 things worry me. One is everybody is mimicking the BJP. The liberals are also mimicking the BJP in finding fault with everything. There's something wrong with it. And the BJP is doing that instead of taking a different position. The liberals, to my mind, are almost mimicking the BJP, and therefore it's a great compliment to the BJP's propaganda. 2, information that's easily available everywhere. The moment something happens, we say, oh, it shouldn't happen. An ordinance could be prepared. This kind of pandemic, nobody could, even the makers of the constitution could not have imagined. So let's understand we have an unprecedented thing. And as far as the election rolls are concerned, I do not see an issue of privacy personally very clearly. I don't see that issue. Privacy advocates, of course, say everything is private. What is privacy and what is private has not been defined. We have a great Puttaswamy judgment given by 9-judge bench, which says privacy is a fundamental right of citizens, but you read the whole judgment, you can't figure out what is privacy. There are various theories, various philosophies, various ratios given, but I look at it from the RTI perspective, an ordinary poor PIO, or even a first appellate authority, or even a high court judge, reads Puttaswamy, it's an extraordinarily complex argument to figure out what is privacy. Therefore, everything is privacy. My name is private, my address is private, my age is private, everything is private. I think we need to change this position and look at it from a different perspective.
Very interesting.
One thing I'd just like to point out, 99%, I have asked various people, there is no appropriate word for the word privacy in Hindi.
But that doesn't mean it exists. I mean, this is my, it doesn't exist.
What? It doesn't exist. No, I'm saying privacy is a concept which must be taken properly. And Article 19.2 defines what information can be not shared. And that does not cover this.
All right, so I have just the person to answer all of those questions. Mr. Pawan Duggal joins us right now, and he's a champion of privacy. My understanding, Mr. Duggal, of privacy has been this. If there is a CCTV camera outside my front door placed near the lift for safety's sake, then that is the right of the housing society in order to maintain safety in the building. But the CCTV camera placed inside my front door, inside my home, in the privacy of my home, is my prerogative. And that's what it means to be private, is that you decide what you want to share and what you don't want to share. But the questions that Mr. Gandhi is asking is very valid. And fundamentally, if the list is published by the Election Commission on the eve of the elections anyway, is there a private list? Is there a risk to data theft? On a fundamental note, if the agencies in question are going to be a little casual with the manner in which they treat this data, is there a threat that might affect national security if it gets into the wrong hands? Mr. Duggal.
believe that clearly these kind of situations are unprecedented, were never really thought of, and now they have arisen. But the fact is, because they have arisen, is not a license to go in the manner they would want to be going. The fact remains is, yes, electoral rolls are available for publishing in the public domain. But the fundamental issue is of Election Commission of India officially giving it to the government, though it's for the greater good of humanity in terms of vaccine dissemination. But all this is currently possible because India is seeing a massive policy vacuum. The government also knows, the Election Commission also knows there is no law in India that is aimed at protecting privacy. Justice Puttaswamy's judgment is a landmark judgment, but that judgment never got followed up by any dedicated legislation on privacy, whether it was data privacy or whether it's personal privacy. The Indian Information Technology Act 2000 has been too much of a lame duck in terms of trying to protect both data privacy and personal privacy. Further, the Data Protection Bill of 2019 is still pending consideration before the Joint Parliamentary Committee. So once this kind of political, shall I say, policy vacuum is existing, it is convenient for various governmental agencies to go behind the garb of this so-called policy vacuum and say, look, there's nothing stopping it. Further, it's for the greater good. Nobody can argue that the objectives are not noble. Yes, the objectives are noble, but it's actually setting a dangerous precedent. Because today it's vaccine, tomorrow it could be nationalism, third thing could be national security, fourth thing could be sovereignty, security, integrity of India. You name it and you have it. You're opening up the door and the Pandora's box to large number of potential uses, misuses, and permutations and combinations. So I think while in principle, it does not appeal to be very, very, shall I say, violative, but I think it's time for the government to get the house in order. It's time to have some kind of a legal semblance to say, look, this is happening on a one-time basis, but then where is the guarantees that this data is now not going to be misused by governmental agencies? Already when I look at during COVID-19, and I look at the contact tracing apps like Arogya Setu, which has been collecting a lot of data. A lot of this data is going ultimately in the hands of governmental agencies, which a lot of people are not very clear whether they had or did not have the appropriate rights to access the same. So I think the learnings are, we are too big a nation. We cannot afford to do this wrong. Yes, this time, because of vaccine, you've shared it, it's okay. But tomorrow, it should not be a precedent. Let's wait on for the Personal Data Protection Bill. But even this Personal Data Protection Bill is not going to specifically address the unique kind of a situation that's currently arisen.
Mr. Duggal, what is privacy? And specifically, is there a Hindi word for it? I'll also try and find out if there's a Kannada word for it, but you go first.
I wouldn't know, but Hindi, if you tell me, I could argue about it.
So thank you. The Hindi word is nijita. So it's nijita, आपकी व्यक्तिगत निजता और आपकी data निजता. Personal privacy.
I'm aware of this, sir. Nijita is personal. Yeah. And nijita is personal. Privacy is not equivalent to personal. And that's where the confusion lies. Because the Hindi word is nijita, everybody says everything personal is private. This is a great joke on the whole system.
The problem is कि Hindi language में इस तरह का specific शब्द है नहीं. So at best, the nearest one that comes is nijita.
My submission is privacy was not a major issue in India. It's being made so by people who are taking US concepts and Western concepts and saying, "Ki now I will have corruption and misgovernance of Indian style, but I will protect it."
No, but
with privacy.
No, Mr. Gandhi, privacy was not a thing in India because WhatsApp was not a thing in India, and because Facebook was not a thing in India, and because you didn't at that point share everything with Google. Now the whole world is writing laws because we have moved into a different, we live differently today. We live off the internet. And
let me point out, before the RTI Act came, there were two judgments at least that I am aware of. I'm not a lawyer, Kharaj Singh and Raj Gopal, where some attempt was made to say what is privacy. That said motherhood, procreation, things that happen in the house, sexual preferences, medical records. These are understandable. These are certainly issues of privacy. But today, your name is private, your age is private, your electoral roll, what does the electoral roll tell you? Your name, address, and age. Is it really an issue of privacy? And the other way I argue is, does government have the right to intrude on my privacy in the normal course? Like you said, what I do in my house is private. You cannot come into my house and do something or photograph something. But outside, what I do is in public domain. And now everything relating to this, and my theory is that because of right to information, everything personal is now being labeled as private.
Okay, but to the lawyers who want to respond to that, since it's now a fundamental right according to the Supreme Court, we should get a clearer understanding of what privacy is. And does this, and I don't believe, Mr. Gandhi, that the sharing of the electoral roll is a privacy issue. I believe that it's a data protection issue, and there is data theft is a really dangerous thing. Mr. Hegde, if you want to address this, yes, please.
First, let me define privacy. And the definition at a fundamental level is this: privacy is the right to be left alone. I decide what I want revealed to the world. Now, there is a database with the Election Commission that this is this gentleman who is entitled to vote, who lives at such and such a place, and therefore his voting booth is at this place. Now, you take this data, add to the data. Oh, this gentleman is 55 plus, but he said he has these comorbidities. My medical data, which I would not want to reveal to anyone else, is also there. It gets aggregated. Thereafter, what are you going to do with that data? Are you going to share it with the insurers, with my insurance company, for instance? Or are you going to share it with all kinds of people who would want to sell me all kinds of medical devices? Therefore, the question of privacy on data privacy is a valid question. If a governmental agency which was collecting data for one specific purpose has to hand over data to another agency for another purpose altogether, it still has a responsibility to ensure that that data is not misused. Now, let me tell you how Election Commission data itself was misused. I spoke of Pana Pramukhs. Equally, in any communal riot, how is it that certain houses get targeted? It's the same data. Of course, that is being done unofficially. Now, when this data is pre-packaged, searchable, there definitely are privacy issues that arise. Privacy is not a Western Hawa. At the end of the day, as long as people wear clothes and do not, for the greater social good, say that we have to expose everything or can't be required to expose everything, there is something which is innately private and which is integral to our humanity.
So, Mr. Hegde, just to understand what you're saying, like Mr. Gandhi feels that this is extraordinary times that require extraordinary measures. He's fully within his rights to feel that way about his own data.
Yes.
And if you feel differently about your own data, you should be given that choice. That's what you're saying.
Exactly so. I should have the option of opting out. My data should not be available to the government to do a general trawling exercise. Okay, we have, in the absence of any legislation which makes vaccination compulsory, if I were to decide to opt out, I do not want some gentleman, maybe well-meaning, maybe directed by the government, or maybe directed by a political party, to turn up at my doorstep and say, oh, I have come to escort you to the nearest facility.
Mr. Duggal, here's the question. So obviously that, the right to say no to sharing data, the right to say no to the vaccine itself is an intrinsic right that the Indian citizens have. Also, if this data were to fall into the wrong hands, either through data theft or because this, gentleman's word that these two agencies have exchanged saying delete it when you're done doesn't actually happen, what is the possible risk for us as a country, as a community, as citizens?
I think the risks are manifold. we have to realize that this kind of a data is something that state and non-state actors are going to very keenly look at. And they would be all the more interested to get this complete data so that the complete profiling of the Indian population can be done. So this can be done both again by private stakeholders as also by state actors. So therefore, ultimately, this could potentially be setting a bad precedent in the sense that India could be potentially compromising its data sovereignty. Further, because this data is going to go into the governmental agency's hand without any adequate attention to cybersecurity, without even stipulating reasonable security practices and procedures, and without any appropriate checks and balances, the chances of it ultimately landed in the hands of cyber criminals, of state and non-state actors, and ultimately for sale on the darknet cannot be ruled out. Once that's made available, then I think India needs to be fully prepared that whatever the current targets of attacks that are happening, they're going to multiply many folds. So we have a fundamental problem. Ultimately, when you're doing this, you are ultimately opening up a window, which window can slowly become a door, then can become a huge opening, which can expose the nation, apart from the citizens per se, to this. A lot of people can say, look, sir, to the Election Commission, I only gave you my data for election purposes. I never authorized you, my data, to be shared with any other governmental agency. When you're doing that, you're automatically violating my right to privacy, and therefore I'm going to take you to court under the writ jurisdiction and say, look, sir, you are state, and that being so, you're violating my privacy. So the moment this kind of actions are going to take place, we could see some potential public interest litigations also coming this particular way. But ultimately, we have to wake up to data protection and cybersecurity. Otherwise, very quickly, this is going to be in the hands of intelligence agencies across the world. And then you realize you have this complete information. The next time any kind of a public order or shall I say riot has to be engineered or targeted or initiated, then this kind of a data in the hands of shall I say mischievous state and non-state actors could effectively be a big ammunition which could be used against India. So I believe India needs to be far more careful. It's not that flippant, that casual, that okay, it's a pandemic time, you can share what you have. Sorry, even if it's pandemic time, the Constitution is no longer dead. The Constitution is still a living document, and therefore you should not be doing things which are intrinsically in contravention of the principles established under the Indian Constitution. Faye, we can't hear you, please. Can you put out?
Sorry about that. My dog was barking in the background. Bharat Raval says intention shouldn't be the deciding factor on decision making. We need to make sure that good intentioned decisions don't end up in disaster. Why doesn't the government make privacy laws on priority and then do what it wants? I believe the argument to that, Bharat, would be that there isn't enough time. I mean, we're going to start tomorrow morning. There isn't enough time to be able to do this. Also, the government has been sitting on the privacy laws for a couple of years now, at least. So it's not something that they're going to turn around in one weekend. It won't be done by Tuesday. But we have to also ask ourselves this question. Mr. Hegde, if I may just bring this to you. Mr. Gandhi said that the electoral rolls data has name, age, address, perhaps, and that's of one individual. But if we consider what the data of the population means, and also if despite having all of these other databases, the Aadhaar, which was supposed to be the be-all and end-all of identification, and the government fought so hard in court to bring in the Aadhaar and force everybody onto that platform, why aren't they using the Aadhaar data? Why are they using the electoral data? What is the need? The fact that there is PAN card, there are several other forms, but they're still going back to electoral data. What can political parties possibly do when they have this much, when this data is handed over as a lump sum? And why would this be interesting in your opinion?
We're not only talking of political parties. Pawan Duggal indicated that it can get into anybody's hands. Now, let's take a hypothetical example. Somebody who is nearing 60 lives in a particular tough area of a city. Says he has comorbidities. He has given all this data for the purpose of vaccination. Is vaccinated. You are looking at a person of that particular profile for conducting maybe a terrorist act or two. That every bit of data analysis can yield so many situations, all of them cannot be comprehended. And that is why the first principle is of minimizing data collection only to the strict purposes required. Now, you asked why is it that they've gone back to the electoral roll? They've simply gone back to the electoral roll because the data in Aadhaar has been compromised. There are some huge numbers of ghosts in Aadhaar. So when you correlate the election commission data with the people in Aadhaar, you might see a greater amount of profiling, which is possible. Right now, I want to ask the government one simple question. The pandemic is more or less temporary. Nobody really envisions the pandemic going on for beyond this year. A large portion of the pandemic has already been sorted out with the mask, and vaccines right now are in short supply. But the short supply will not long endure. The government itself does not envision so far a compulsory vaccination of everyone on the lines of the polio campaign. And you must remember that the polio campaign took nearly 2 or 3 decades.
Yes.
In these circumstances, what kind of data are you searching for or recording? And why would anybody want to cheat on a vaccine? Somebody takes one shot, he'll come back for a second shot after 21 days. He's not going to get any further benefit by having a third shot of the vaccine. So what is the purpose? Except that an opportunity has come to refine your data, your suspect data in Aadhaar, with collecting more data here.
Mr. Gandhi, have these arguments convinced you? Because what Mr. Hegde just said actually just made sense to me, that why would anybody take more than one vaccine? They would not. And ideally, if someone wants to opt out, shouldn't they be given that option? I mean, there could only be two possibilities. Either someone's looking to make use of the data, which they shouldn't be doing for things other than the vaccine, or there is a plan to sort of, march people to the vaccination camps and have them forcibly vaccinated in a Soviet sort of way, which is also not how this country works. Are you telling me that you're completely comfortable with this idea still?
I'm completely comfortable. And first, to the question of why they would want to know who took the vaccine, the vaccination is effective provided you take 2 shots at a certain space of time. Okay? We can't think of a simple way of why the government would want data or to follow up and say, if you've taken the first vaccine and do not go for the second, which will happen to lots of people. Very large number of people will miss the second shot. Even when our doctor says go for a checkup, a lot of us miss our checkups. We can't deny that. It's a very common human failing. So therefore, to track people for the second shot, I think there is a need to know who took the first shot. B, those who are old and have not taken may need some persuasion. It may not be force, but I think it's legitimate to use persuasion to tell people that, look, you need to get vaccinated. 3, the comorbidities are not part of the electoral roll at all. I thought we were discussing, should the electoral roll data be given to the vaccination COVID system? We were not discussing the other way around. And brilliantly, Mr. Hegde defined privacy as the right to be left alone. So I'm aware of the English definition also. Let's look at it objectively. To be left alone, I need to go to the Himalayas and do tapasya there. So long as I'm in society, I am not alone. And I'm doing it by conscious choice. I have a choice. Nobody told me to be in the society, to stay in this house with my family, with my friends, etc. But this is a matter of choice. And what I do with publicly is a public matter. And what is privacy? I would completely accept. What I do in my house is privacy. What I, like somebody said, they can't photograph you without your clothes. Fair enough, that's privacy. But things are known. And let me point out, the Puttaswamy thing is a very, very seductive thing.
No, but Mr. Gandhi, coming back to the fact that this is not a question of privacy, this is a question of data security. And what happens?
Okay, let's understand. What does this data security mean? Let somebody spell out in detail.
But Mr. Duggal just did that. If this data finds its way into the hands of private companies, they will misuse it. If it finds its way into the hands of international terrorists, they can misuse it. If it finds its way to the dark web, they can use it for scams. I will give you a very simple example. The scams that come to our senior citizens, asking them to send money, asking them, we will shut your bank account. And how do they get that? They get that by accessing large-scale phone numbers and ages of people. Name, phone number, age, a vague detail of which bank account bank your account is in, and you can get someone to call out their card number and this is the misuse of data. But Mr. Duggal, do you want to answer that question again, please? This time you're on mute. Yes.
Sorry. I think we need to be making the distinction very clearly between privacy and cybersecurity. Unfortunately, a lot of times they appear to be overlapping concepts, but they actually are not. As Mr. Hegde said, it's your right to be left alone, which has got nothing to do with the data security. Data security is your right that your data does not get unauthorizedly accessed by people who do not have the permission or the consent of mine to access the same. Now, the moment I give my data to a governmental agency, for example, the Election Commission of India, the Election Commission of India is collecting the data under the broad umbrella of the Indian Information Technology Act, because ultimately it's data and information in the electronic form. Today, when I make my entries into the electoral rolls, the election officer comes to my home and feeds that particular data in an electronic device, which then gets connected to a backend server. And ultimately, the data in the form of electoral rolls is data and information in the electronic form. That being so, this data clearly is covered under the Information Technology Act. The Information Technology Rules 2011, specifically the Information Technology, Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures, and Sensitive Personal Data or Information Rules 2011 mandate all kinds of stakeholders, the moment they're handling or processing sensitive personal data, to take the consent. Prior to that, informing me for what purpose it's being taken, and then taking my consent for that particular purpose, and also not to use the data for any other purpose, barring the purpose which is indicated for the purposes of collection. Now, election data has only been collected for the purposes of election processes and participation thereof. It's never been collected either for pandemic purposes or for all kinds of acts of God or other unprecedented consequences. So I think the Election Commission of India is potentially playing with some fire. And the legal exposure cannot be ruled out, because people are more likely to say, look, my data, okay, it's gone. Tell me what kind of reasonable security practices and procedures did you insist from the other governmental agency before handing it over? Merely saying that, you delete and I'm okay with my eyes closed is not really an effective answer. So I think we need to make a distinction between privacy on the one hand, my ability that my personal space around me is not invaded by others, even if I'm in the public domain, even if I am in a public place, but there's still an aura of a personal space around me. I don't want that to be interfered in. The moment my data is getting collected, it has got a direct connection with my body, with my being. And that being so, it will automatically come within the ambit of personal data. In any case, electoral data would clearly qualify as personally identifiable data, because with the help of this data, you can identify a particular person. So the law is expecting certain norms to be fulfilled. I'm not so sure whether these norms have been fulfilled in this case. And if they've not been fulfilled, I think it will be good that both agencies try to fulfill the norm as soon as possible. Just because there's an emergency does not mean that the established principles of law or the processes that which have been set in motion by existing legislations need to be relegated to the dustbin.
All right, so I'm just looking at it. The co-win platform is not live. I can't find it anywhere. A cautionary, piece of information to all of our listeners, all of our viewers. If you see platforms right now, that's not it. Do not register yourself on anything because you'll be giving away data you don't want to give. You'll be entering your phone number, your address, things like that. Don't do it. Nothing that you find on the internet right now is the real thing because the government has not released the real thing. One assumes if the Prime Minister is doing an event tomorrow, it'll probably be released at that event and then go live. But just so we understand our rights, Mr. Hegde, is it okay for healthcare worker, someone above the age of 50, someone below the age of 50 to say, hey, you know what, I don't want it, I'm not coming, leave me out
Yes.
of the vaccine process? Yeah.
Yes. So far, there is no law which compels you to take the vaccination.
So if someone does show up on your doorstep tomorrow saying, "Aapka naam aaya, list mein aap tumhare liye."
YouTube channel.
Okay. If someone says that आपका list में नाम आया, आपको आनी चाहिए, आ जाओ यहाँ पे, हम आपके साथ जाएंगे. Do not listen. You don't have to go.
Do not listen. Escort the gentleman back the way he came. Gentleman or lady.
Is there a possibility of an argument that someone who opts out of the vaccine is endangering the general public by not choosing to break the chain?
There could be an argument made, but at the end of the day, to force somebody to take the vaccination, you would need legislation. You remember we had the same kind of argument during Aadhaar. Aadhaar first came in through an office order, and there was no legislation backing it. Ultimately, they had to bring in legislation. Now, if you bring in legislation, then that legislation can be tested on the touchstone of fundamental rights.
Right. So, and I'm going to leave it there, but it's very interesting. This reminds me so much of all of the conversations we had around Aadhaar and the entire process, the case that the Supreme Court heard over many, many months. The arguments that were made by government about the fact that Aadhaar will be this identification. It was meant to be a verification where you verify that you are who you say you are. If you really need to do this right now, shouldn't, and the government argued over and over again that Aadhaar is ideal, it's not compromised, it's fantastic. Why aren't they using Aadhaar? Why are they using the voter list? It makes me frown, to say the least. But for now, we can leave it at this, that you have a fundamental right to say no. That doesn't mean you should say no. That's not what we're telling you to do. We're saying that you should examine all of the pros and cons and make up your mind for yourself. If you want the vaccine, it is available starting tomorrow. Nobody can force you. There is a lot of information, a lot of coverage about the vaccine. Take a look at it, keep yourself informed, and make your decisions for yourself and your family. For now, sanitize, wear a mask, stay safe. We can at least do that. Well, we can't do it with our data right now, but we'll at least do it with our health. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation with us. I really appreciate it. For our audience, we're going to continue to track this, and we'll also track the process as it develops in this co-win platform as it becomes live tomorrow. Have a nice night.
Thank you. Bye, Faye.